Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
At Shaw Hall, and they were growing 500 acres of lucerne, and they were cutting this lucerne 3 times a year. The first cut I was trying my hardest to stop the pheasants from being in it. The second cut I would be driving it with the dogs so that they shouldn't nest in it, and the third time they cut it I'd be trying to get hen birds out with young ones so that they didn't get cut up. And Mr. Yates, I wasn't rearing any then, and I thought, oh no, I'm wasting my time here now, because you just couldn't cope with all them pheasants being killed and one thing and another. And then he was going to bring a keeper down from Norfolk to help, so I thought I was getting a bit fed up with heavy land. I thought I'll look out for another job. And I was in the pub one night just before Christmas, and Lord Sainsbury and Lady Sainsbury came in. They'd been at the old folks' Christmas party. They came in, and I normally caged a bottle of whisky off him every year for the village hall football club Christmas whist drive and draw. So when he came in, I got up and I said, "You look perished, my lord." He said, "I am perished," he said. I said, "What can I get you to drink?" "A scotch, please," he said, "with water." So I went and I asked the lady, I said, "What about you, my lady?" "Yes, I'll have the same," she said. So I went and got 2 scotches and a jug of water, and I sat them down where I'd been sitting near the farm. Came back with them, and cheers, they said. I said, "I'm glad I see you, my lord." I said, "I'm coming, I want to cage the usual bottle of whisky for the football club Christmas draw," because he was president of the football club. "Oh yes," he said, "I wondered," he said, "if you was having another one this year." He said, "I'll get it out," he said, "and it'll be on the ledge in the kitchen tomorrow sometime." I said, "All right, sir, I'll come down and pick it up." There they had their whisky, and I don't know whether they had another one or not, but they didn't stop long anyhow. And the next morning about 11, I drove down the houses where they lived, tapped the kitchen door and opened it, and normally the bottle would be on the ledge, but it wasn't. And Lady Sainsbury appeared. She said, "Oh dear, Alan hasn't got your whisky, Dick." So I said, "No." She said, "He hadn't been very well in the night." I said, "Hadn't he?" "No." She said, "He's had to be in and out of bed several times. That's what he had up the village hall last night," she said. So she said, "He's feeling a bit better." She said, "Go in the other room and see him." So I took my cap off and laid it on the top and went in the other room, and there he stood. "Oh," he said, "I forgot your whisky, Dick. Come in." So we got up, he said, "Shall we have a scotch?" I said, "Good idea, sir." So he went and got a bottle of Teachers, and he poured a couple of tumblers, and he poured out. He said, "Soda water?" I said, "Yes, please." Put a good old dollop of soda water in, and out he went again. He came back with this bottle of whisky, and "Sit down," he said, "a minute." So we sat there talking, and he was at the time looking for a gardener, because the old boy had left about 2 years before. He'd been there years, and he'd had a Scotsman, and this Scotsman left round about August time, so he'd been several months without anybody. So something to say, I said, how are you getting on finding a gardener? He said, oh, don't mention it, he said, don't mention it, he said. I suppose I had a bloke come yesterday, he said, he had, no, last week, an interview, he said, at 12 noon on a Saturday, he said, what happened, he never turned up at all. He said, I got this nice house in the country, nice garden, he said, and I'd love coming here every Friday and going back on a Monday. He said, and unless I can get a gardener, somebody to keep an eye on the place, he said, I shall have to get rid of it. And I said, the last thing I want to do. So I put a prick my ears up, because I knew he got an empty cottage down the road where the gardener had moved out of. So I said, oh, well, what about if somebody in the village, sir? I said, thought about taking the job and they didn't want your house. Oh, he said, I wouldn't mind a bit. He said, all I want is somebody to keep an eye on the place, he said, from Monday till Friday when we're not here. And I thought, that sounds all right. Only 5 minutes away from home. Oh, that sounds all right. So I said, what about if somebody in the village didn't want to have your house? He said, no, it wouldn't matter a bit. So I said, I'll keep my ear to the ground. He said, I wish you would. So I said, beg your pardon. I said, tell me to mind my own business if you like. I said, but if anybody's interested, I want to know what the wages are. I said, what have I got to tell them? Well, I'm paying the last one what went. He said, so-and-so per week. Well, that was £14 a week more than I was getting at your hall. I thought, cool, hell, I thought, oh hell, this sounds all right. So I said, all right, my lord, I left. I said, thank you very much for the whiskey. I said, I'll keep my ear to the ground. He said, all right. So I came home to Dolly and I said, I got myself another job. She said, what? I said, gardener for Lord Sainsbury. She said, really? I said, yeah. So I said, I ought to put in for that. So she said, well, that sounds all right. So I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I said, Sunday evening, before they have their evening meal, I'll ring them up and tell them what I'm considering and see what they think. So the Sunday about 6 o'clock, 6:30, I rung Hosies, and Lady Sainsbury answered the phone. I said, there's Dick Ruggles here, my lady. She said, oh yes, Dick. I said, I was talking to his lordship yesterday about a gardener. She said, yes. So he said, you're going to keep your ears and eyes open for somebody. I said, yeah. I said, I think I got somebody. She said, what, already? I said, yeah. I said, I think I'll apply for the job myself. She said, you're joking. I said, no, I'm not. I said, I can, she said, they won't let you leave where you are. I said, they won't have no option. Only I said, I was getting the right time of the year. I said, it'll soon be the end of the shooting season, the end of January. She said, are you sure? I said, yeah. She said, I'll tell Alan when I go through. So she said, I'll get him to come to the phone. So it went a few minutes and he came to the phone. He said, are you sure, Dick, what you're saying? I said, yes, sir. He said, oh, I'll tell you what. He said, I think this is a 5-day wonder with you. He said, I think you might decide tomorrow that you don't want to leave your lifestyle of gamekeeping. He said, I'll give you all the week to think about it. And when we come there next Friday, he said, perhaps we can meet on the Saturday morning if you're in the same frame of mind. I said, all right, sir. So the next Friday come round, and about 4:30, I said, well, the Sainsbury should be in residence now. I said, they ought to ring up, if they're interested, they'll ring up about 5. Sure enough, about 5 the phone went. I asked and he said, Lord Allen here, Dick. I said, yes. He said, are you in the same frame of mind you were last weekend? I said, yes, sir. Are you sure? I said, positive. He said, well, I'm highly delighted. Can you come and see me tomorrow morning at about 11? I said, yes, sir. He said, and we'll clinch details. We'll clinch the deal then if you can. I said, all right, sir. So down I went at 11 o'clock and tapped the door and in she came, come in. Come in, Mr. Gardener, she says. I went through the old round. The old man shook hands. He said, sit down, we'll have another scotch on it. And he went through everything, you know. I'm ever so pleased you're coming. Start work at 8 till 5. That's what the other gardeners have been doing. I said, that'll be all right. And I thought, I'm not coming Saturday mornings. I can help it. And I thought, go away. When they go away on a Monday, they come on a Friday about at 4, 4:15. They go on away on Monday about 9:45 with the chauffeur come and pick them up. And they've got the place to yourself all the week. I shoo me round the garden. The kitchen garden hadn't been dug at all. It was just they'd left it from the summer. Shoo me the mowers in the shed. I mean, I'd been on and off in houses for years, so I knew all the stables and one thing and another. Lovely old barn with timber in that old barn go back to the 11th century, and a lovely floor, all maple floor, little 3-inch boards, and that I polished it once when I was there with floor polish, and that came up like a violin case, exactly. Slippery cord, that was marvellous. Anyhow, shoo me all round. So he said, when can you start? I said, I shan't start till the first week in February, sir. I shall work me notice out at shore all January, and the season finish on the 1st of February. I said, so I'll start down there on the Monday. I said, I think I've been looking at the date. I think that's the 3rd of February. He said, well then, you'll have a fortnight with us. He said, before we go, I used to go out to Antigua or out to the West Indies for 6 weeks, end of January or 5th February, and come home in March. So he said, we can leave the place and feel safe that you're here to keep an eye on things. So I said we took. He said, have you got a vehicle? This is where I slipped up. I should have gone down on my bike. I took my own car. You get to know these things afterwards, don't you? And I should have said, what about a pension scheme, sir? Because I'm sure he would have jumped at the chance then. Did that, I didn't mention it till I'd been there 6 years, and he said, you're rather too old now. That sort of thing. So that's how I come to go to Sainsbury's. He handed me a pair of secateurs. Because he used to love to go out round the garden and clip little, dead rose heads off, you know, as an exercise. He called me one morning before they went to the West Indies. He said, these secateurs are no good. He said, look at the state that garden has left them in. I mean, there was nothing wrong with them. There was a lovely pair of Spear and Jackson secateurs, enamel handles, but the blades had gone a bit dark. I only wanted a bit of emery paper on it, come up a treat. He said, throw them in the dustbin. He said, I'll bring a new pair down next week. So I thought, I ain't throwing them away. I got in the shed, I put them in my pocket. I'm still using them at home now. And I kept them up in the greenhouse for a long time, till I was there 8 years. They had a Finnish woman come to finish in the house, a housekeeper. She interfering old bit she was. I went one morning, he called me just before he got in the rolls. He said, look at these secateurs, he said. The state of your secateurs in that greenhouse. He said, I found them up there. I said, you didn't. I said, your housekeeper did. I said, you told me to fling them away. I said, 8 years ago, but I'm still using them up there. They're running down to the to the tool shed every time I want a pair of secateurs. I got one pair down there and one up there, and he didn't know what to say. I said, still, I will throw them away now, sir. I said, I'll throw them away in my own shed at home. That's how we used to go on. He had a burglary once, and the policeman kept coming. I said, kept saying, when will Mr. Sainsbury be in residence? I said, not till Friday. He still kept calling him Mr. Sainsbury, and I didn't contradict him. I didn't say, Lord, no. You come Friday, but up past 4, he'll be here. This comfortable rolled up, and I said to Sainsbury, I said, you got the policeman come take a statement, because we'd had a burglary. So he kept on about Mr. Sainsbury, and he finally said, just take a few particulars. He said, age, and I ain't told him. Occupation. So he said, well, funny, he said, I haven't really thought about it. I suppose, he said, I'm a retired grocer. Well, he was, wasn't he? I mean, he'd inherited Sainsbury business from his father. He said, I suppose I'm a retired grocer. Of course, the policeman wrote down retired grocer. A couple of years later, he said to me, one Monday morning, we used to have a little up and down or some Monday morning. He said, I had a very
expert at gardener.
Yeah, I had a very, what was the word, Dolly?
Expert
gardener. Stay yesterday. I said, you very often do, sir. He said, he's rather surprised you haven't dug your kitchen garden. Well, I knew where this bloke came from. He came from Gosville, where that's all sand. He said, he's already dug his. I said, this is far too heavy to dig. I shall have to wait till the February time or January if we get frost. Then if we get some hard frost, I can dig it then. He said, well, he's dug his. So I said, well, the chauffeur stood there with the door open, ready for him to get in. Well, if you're expert gardener and want a job, I said, send him over here. He can have a go at digging this if he like. So he said, you know you're blasted trouble, don't you? So I said, no, sir. I said, I've got several, I think. I said, but I don't mind listening to another one. He said, you're nothing but a retired gamekeeper, really, and he stamped his foot. And I thought, you old bugger, you. So he turned, started walking to the rolls. And I said, you know what you are, sir, don't you? And he stopped and looked round with his mouth open. I said, you're only a retired grocer's son, ain't you? With that, he got in the car and the old chauffeur winked his eye and slammed the door. He told the new gardener what took over of me. He said, the previous bloke told me I was only a retired grocer's son. He said, the meadow, because I'd got about 8 acres. The meadow, he said, Mr. Metson in the village cut it for hay. So I said, yes, I know that, sir. Well, I've heard the old gardener say that if Morris Metson cut it for hay, and then it come a wet time, he said, I have a hell of a job to clear that hay up. He said, because Morris don't want it then, ain't no good for him. He said, I'll spend a fortnight in there raking old wet hay up and trying to get rid of it. He said, you want to try and get out of that job if you can? I said, I know somebody. I know a farmer got some sheep. I said, I'll have a word with him and see if he can fold his sheep on there. So Robin Hodge at Bearbrook, do you know Robin Hodge?
Yeah.
So I saw Robin and I said, I'd like to bring some sheep down to Lord Sainsbury's, would you? I said, you got about 8 acres down there. I said, that's quite good grass. In fact, I said, I'd do it good. I said, because that's all loose. I said, and I think that's full of mice. So Robin said, I'll come and have a look. So Robin came and had a look. He said, yeah, I wouldn't mind. He said, bringing about 30 ewes up here. He said, be all right. He said, you keep an eye on them, can't you? I said, yeah. So I said to the Lord Sainsbury, on about this bit of grass, I said, I've seen a friend of mine got some sheep, so I said, he's fully prepared to fold about 30 ewes on your meadow. I said, I would do that world of good. I'd fertilise it, I'd tread it down firm. We shouldn't want to worry about getting rid of wet hay. What do you think? And I could see his brain working. much to say, what's he scheming of now? So he said, oh, well, it sounds quite a good idea. I said, well, it is. He said, well, he would have to fence it in, you know. I said, oh, he'd be prepared to do that. So I said, he wouldn't bring them sheep in and got a fence, just a bit of barbed wire, be proper sheep netting. Oh, he said, well, tell him that'll be all right. So I said to Rob, yeah. Old man said, you can put your sheep on there. So Robin did. He used to bring them down every year. And every year he'd have a sheep, he'd have 1 or 2 sheep killed for himself, and he used to bring one up here for the Sainsbury. Dolly, all cut up, Dolly would bag it up for them. So he used to take this lamb down to them in the box. What the shepherd sent you, my lady. Oh, thank you ever so much. All bagged up, you see, labelled. In the freezer that would go. Never say a word of thank you, who bagged or anything like that. And one year, Robin said up the pub, I'll bring a Sainsbury, tell Dolly I'll bring Sainsbury lamb tomorrow. I said, don't take the Dolly this year, bring her straight down houses. They're in residence. I said, get her to bag it up, and she and the housekeeper. So Robin rolled up about 11 o'clock with a tray. So I tapped the kitchen door. I said, the shepherd has brought you a lamb, my lady. Oh, thank you ever so much, she said. Robin went in and plonked it on the kitchen table. There you are, my lady. Thank you ever so much. So me and Robin come out, and after about a half hour she come to me. She said, it hasn't been bagged up. I said, no. I said, well, you and the housekeeper must do it. She said, I was always bagged up other years. I said, yeah, Dolly's always done it, my lady. I said, but I didn't see why Dolly should this year. Being you're in residence, you can do it. I nearly said, she don't get a word of thanks in any case. Anyhow, the lady in this housekeeper had to do it. And the next day, I was out talking to his old man near the barn, and she come out, and she said it only got 2 legs then. So I looked down her. I said, I beg your pardon? She said, that sheep had only got 2 legs. So I thought the penny dropped then. I said, yes, that's what they normally have. She said, I thought animals had 4 legs. And then he could see he said, darling, shoulders, he said. Sheep have shoulders. Fancy a grocer's wife didn't know sheep had shoulders, he said. I thought, I know what the old girl was on. She thought I'd pinched a couple of bloody legs. Oh yeah, life's good. I just suddenly thought of this one the same the other day. His secretary used to ring me up, Iris her name was, and we could speak confidentially to one another. She rang me one Tuesday or Wednesday morning, and she said, Dick, I've got just a couple of things. I said, oh yeah. His Lady Sainsbury told me to tell you that the water in the swimming pool was not hot enough. So I said, well, I only saw her Monday when she went. I said, whatever did she say so? He said, well, I suppose she forgot, but she said, remind Dick, the water in the pool is not hot enough. I said, I think that's plenty hot enough. Well, she said, her ladyship said no. I said, well, I've just washed my feet in, and I said, that's plenty hot enough. I think, anyhow, she said, what I really want, she said, Sainsbury's has started a new security officer. He's a retired Chief Inspector of the Metropolitan Police. And she said, like all jobs, a new broom want to sweep clean. She said, I think he's being nosy rather than efficient. He wants to look at all the directors' private properties. He's already done 3 or 4. And he wants to come down and look at Mr. Allen's, as they used to call Lord Sainsbury, Mr. Allen. Come, well, have a look down Mr. Allen's. So she said, will that be all right? So I said, yes. Then when does he want to come? She said, well, he said, any day next week, providing he knows in good time, he can arrange it. So she said, shall we say next Tuesday? I said, yes, if you like. What time? So I said, well, he don't want to, I don't suppose he'll leave London until 9 o'clock. She said, no, I don't suppose he will. I said, well, if he get down here about 11, I can show him round and it'll be all done by lunchtime. She said, all right. So she said, well, I'll leave you to deal with him. I said, what's his name? She said, Mr. Rushbrook. You'll be forgot that for next week. I said, I bet I don't. She said, how are you going to remember? I said, there's a pub as you go near Bury St Edmunds called the Rushbrook Arms. So I shall remember him. So she said, all right. Well, I don't have to tell you. She said, be on your toes. I said, all right. So on this Tuesday, I'd got the burglar alarm off the house and I'd got the kettle on. I thought, we'll have a cup of coffee when he get here. And about 5 minutes past 11, in the car, in the drive came this brand new Ford Orion, shiny red. I thought, now be on the board it. And the number of it was A200 P&O. I thought, well, that's easy to remember. P&O liners during the war. So anyhow, I shook hands, said, good morning, Mr. Rushbrook. He said, oh, how do you know my name? I said, this is the thing he told me. He said, fancy remembering? I said, oh, there's a pub as you go near Bury St Edmunds called the Rushbrook Arms. And when we went and had a cup of coffee, and I'll show him over the house, you see. But I didn't show him where there was any tread mats on the up top of the landing or anywhere like that. I thought, you never know these people, do you? I thought, if he don't know they're there, he can't tell anybody else they're there. They show him all round, and he said, well, there's not much you can do down here in the way of security, is there? I said, no. Only probably, he said, any strange cars? He said, you know, if you can get the number, take the number of any strange cars about. So I said, oh, I do. I said, I've been a gamekeeper for years. I said, the first thing he done was you saw a strange car was to remember the number. I said, yours, for instance, A200 P&O. He said, what? I said, A200 P&O. He said, I only picked it up this morning. I said, oh, I can't help that. He went to the window, he looked down, and he said, damn it, you're right. I said, yeah, of course I'm right. Well, fancy that. He said, I can't get over this. And we got downstairs. I said, would you like to see the village? He said, yes, I think I would. I've got plenty of time. So I put the burglar alarm on and I said, follow me up the village because I shan't come back here till after lunch now. Got him up the village and I showed him where I lived across there. Show him the church, show him the two pubs. I said, would you like a drink? Well, he said, as opening time, and I said, yes. So I took him in. Now, what can I have? He said, I'm not used to. What's the name of the brewery? I said, Green King. I said, they do a nice little brown ale called Suffolk Ale. And I went to the landlord, I said, 2 Suffolks, please. Ken, he said, all right. He poured the 2 Suffolks out. Cheers, son. He said, cheers. Nice to meet you, Mr. Ruggles. And he drank, drink. Oh, right, he said. This is good stuff, isn't it? I said, yeah, it is. He drank that and he had another one. And he said, I think you ought to be going, to tell you the truth. I don't think you ought to have any more of them. No, no, certainly not, he said. The too late, the phone went again. That was ours, the secretary. She said, you made a big impression on Mr. Rushbrook. I said, did I? She said, he couldn't get over that. She said, he come in and she said, did you go to Thomasville? Yes, he said, well, I'll tell you what, if all those directors, he said, on Sainsbury's books, had got a bloke like him looking after their place, he said, they couldn't go wrong. My God, he's on the ball, he said. He took me number, he said, and I only just got in the yard, he knew the number, he said, half an hour later, remembered it. She said, I thought, oh, Dick don't want no education. But I don't think Sainsbury ever knew anything about it. Lord Sainsbury had an old chauffeur named Afar. He'd driven his lordship for 40 years. And in the early days, they hadn't got many shops, you see. Got a few round London, because he took, when he got made a live peer, he took the title of Lord Sainsbury Drury Lane, where their first shop was opened. He said, and now and again he'd say to Fire when he dropped him off at the flat in an evening, come round at 9 o'clock, File, he said, and we'll go and visit Shoreditch. Go and visit the shop in Shoreditch tomorrow morning. Their File used to pick him up at 9 o'clock, went into the car park of Shoreditch, and he'd walk into the store like an ordinary customer. And one of his pet hates was seeing a tin of peas upside down, or a tin of beans upside down, or a cardboard box on the floor. He'd walk round, he'd remember where they were, and then he'd say to an assistant, "Will you get the manager, please?" "Yes, sir, certainly. Who shall I say want him?" "Oh, Mr. Sainsbury." The manager would come with me, he'd say, and he'd point out the tin that was upside down, and another one was wrong, or this cardboard box. So gradually, over the course of a few months, these managers at Shoreditch and Dalston and Hackney, all them places where there was shops, they got to know File, or got to find out about File. They all gave old File their home phone numbers. If his lord, he wasn't Lord then, it was just Mr. Sainsbury. Mr. Sainsbury's coming to visit us the next day. "Give us a ring at home and just tell us, will you?" Their File used to say, "Yes, all right." So he had a whole list of phone numbers, their private home numbers. And so if he was going to Dalston, he'd just ring the manager, what was in charge of the door, say, "We're coming round in the morning, we should be there 9:15, all right." So the manager would get in early with perhaps a couple of assistants. They'd hurry round the store and make sure all the tins were the right way up and nothing was laying about. So Sainsbury ain't got a lot to pick on. They used to say to File, "Leave the boot of the rolls undone, will you? And leave a coat in there." So he used to leave an old Mac rolled up in the back of the boot. And when he put the rolls away at night, he'd open the boot and get his Mac. There'd be a little box of groceries for him and then home to Sainsbury. He said that went on for years like that. But he was a strange fellow really, but he was very good. He very good natured to the village. He said once, "What's happening in the village?" He used to call and see our old postmistress most Saturday mornings. In fact, when we were in the pub, he'd come walking through the village Saturday morning, swinging his walking stick, and he had a little window in our that overlooked the village pump. I used to open his window, and I'd shout out, "Are you going to have a half?" And he'd turn and he'd come walking across to the pub with his stick, and in he'd come, take his trophy hat off. "Well, just then, just a half a bitter," he'd say. And of course he got his title while we were in the pub. And a ghostwriter down the road to Yeldham went and had lunch with him one day, and he said, "Has it made any difference?" He said, "Alan, you getting a title to the people in the village? Have you noticed any difference?" He said, "Yes, sir, it's a bit." He said, "They don't know what to say now." He said, "They don't know whether to say, 'Good morning, my lord,' or 'Good morning, Mr. Sainsbury,' or they don't know what to say." He said, "All they simply say is now 'good morning.'" He said, "And I'll always acknowledge them." He said, "I always say 'good morning,' raise my stick to them." He said, "There's only one bloke that don't take a notice." He said, "It's the landlord of the Chestnuts." He said, "You know him, do you, Dick?" So Peacock said, "Yes, I know him." He said, "Well," he said, "if he sees me go through the village," he said, "he'll open that little window and he'll holler, 'Do you want a half?' He said, and I don't really want a half." He said, "But I go," he said, "because," he said, "I enjoy it." He said, "He doesn't take any notice if I've got a title at all," he said, "and by the time I get to the window," he said, "he's got a half pint of bitter," he said, "and hand it out the window to him." He said, "I never pay for it," he said, "but I stand there," he said, "and we pass the time of day," he said, "before I go round and have a word of Mrs. Claxton, who keeps the post office." He went into Mrs. Claxton's once, and she'd been on holiday down Eastbourne somewhere, or Bournemouth. And he said, "How'd you get on holiday, Mrs. Claxton?" "Oh," she said, "I had a wonderful time, Lord Sainsbury." She said, "But I was very, very disappointed when I got home." He said, oh dear, whatever happened?" She said, "Well, I went into one of your stores on the Friday before I came home the Saturday." She said, "And I bought 2 pounds of sausages." She said, "And when I got them home, they weren't Sainsbury sausages at all, they were Walls. She said, I was so disappointed. He said, oh dear, he said, what a pity. On the Tuesday, the Rolls Royce rolled up at the shop and in walked the chauffeur. He said, with his lordship's compliments, Mrs. Clarkson, there were £2 of Sainsbury sausages. Now, what many people would do that, is there? That's what Sainsbury told old Peacock. He said, that broke up a gentleman. He said, to an old mate of mine, Fred Garwood, lived out around Bottle Hall way. And he had a son and daughter. His wife died and left him with a son and daughter. And his daughter, Fred idolised her. He'd got an old combine crate, what a combines used to come in crates years ago. He got one of them from the farm and he got some old sheets of tin and nailed them on this old crate. And Mary had a little old Austin car, she put it in there under cover. Old bits of felt on the top and old stack cloth over the top, one thing and another. And anyhow, eventually Mary left home and this garage still stood there derelict. Fred was waiting for motor to pick him up one morning to come up the Chestnut. And he thought he'd come old Sainsbury along the road walking with his walking stick. So as he got nearer, Fred said, morning, sir. So Sainsbury said, good morning. Lovely morning, sir. Yes, it's lovely morning. And he poked his stick at this garage for old Fred's. Is that yours? And Fred turned round and looked at it. The wind was a-blowing, the tin was a-rattling. He said, yeah, I reckon so. Well, he said, I put it up, so I expect that's mine. He said, that's an eyesore, man. He said, pull it down. He said, I look at it every time I come by. He said, complete eyesore. Fred said, was in your way? So he said, yeah, pull it down, because I ain't going to. He said, I thought, bugger you, mate. But he was exceptionally good to the village. He used to provide turkeys for their Christmas dinner, their Christmas party, and the wine to go with it. In fact, although he's been dead a few years, his trustees still do it. They provide the money for the turkeys. They don't deliver turkeys now, like they used to. Used to be the chauffeur would bring 3 down or 2 down or whatever they wanted, and the wine as well, but they don't now. He get the local pub to cater, and then he'd pay the bill for the old folks club. Well, I told you when they made me wine waiter, you've already got that, haven't you?
What is that?
When they made me wine waiter, take his place one day, yeah. But he said once I cleared some flower bed, and he was very pleased about that. He said, what did you get up to in the village this week? I said, I had a Proker Church Council meeting last night. I said, we got more expense, the church got to be rewired. So he said, oh, is it going to be expensive? I said, I don't know. I said, we've got an electrician moved in the village now. I said, we're going to get him to do it. I said, might as well give him local work. We can get it done probably a little bit cheaper if he local man. Nice fellow named Miller. Dusty Miller, we call him. So he said, find out what it's going to cost, will you? So I said, yes, sir. He said, let me know. So I called on Dusty going home. Saw his van outside his house, and I told him, I said, how much is that going to cost Dusty a mile of the church? He said, I don't know. I haven't been and worked it out. I said, only Lord Sainsbury want to know. I said, I reckon between you and me, he'll pay for that. I said, so don't hang about, get an estimate out and let me have it, will you? He said, yeah. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll go round tonight and I'll give you a rough one. Call in the morning before you go to work. So I called and there was his envelope, got Dick on it. So I took it down and came in, I opened it. I said, I don't know whether that was 230 or 330. Certainly no more I'd got on the bottom. And when he came out, after he'd had his breakfast and done his exercises and so on, I said, I saw Mr. Miller last night, so I said, I found this in the door this morning. So he undone the envelope and he looked. Oh, he said, that doesn't seem exorbitant, does it? I said, well, let me have a look. I said, no, it doesn't. So he said, all right, tell Mr. Miller to get on with it. To say nothing to nobody, he said, but to let you have the bill, he said, and I'll square that up. He said, you needn't say anything about it. So I said, all right. So that was another little job he done. We had a walk. The church had a walk, Friends of Essex Churches, from Toppersfield Church to Cartledingham Church. Sponsored walk. There was about 9 or 10 ladies in the village. One or two men. Got these sponsored forms, we're going to do it. We had a bloke moving the old rectory, Robin Soames. So Robin said, do you reckon you could see Lord Sainsbury about sponsoring us? I said, you go down yourself, Robin. I said, and tell him what you're going to do. I said, he always goes for a walk Saturday mornings. I said, if you go the back way to hit Cartledingham, by Bottle Hall and down into Castle, across the main road, I said, in all probability, I said, ask him, would he like to join you? So Robin said, do you reckon he would? I said, well, if you make the time right, I said, I should leave Toppersfield about 10:30. He's ready, I was ready to go out about 11. You can pick him up at his gate without him getting up the village. So Robin went off and he rung me up and he said, I've been and seen his lordship. He said, he's going to walk with us. He said, and he'd be delighted to, providing that you come in your van and bring some of us home. He said, I've got the wife to bring a car as well. So I often laughed about this. We had an Irish parson at the same time as this. He was a happy-go-lucky, typical Irishman. He saw me in the village. He said, I understand. He said, you're going to pick up the walkers and bring some of them home. I said, yes, John. He said, I'm going to walk with them. He said, I want a word with you. I said, go on then. He said, we're going the back way, he said, because Lord Sainsbury's coming. I said, that's right. He said, well, I shall drag my toes, he said, when we get near Bottle Hall. He said, and I shall let them all. I shall tell them to carry on, don't wait for me. He said, and I shall pop in Bottle Hall, he said, and have a quick one. He said, I want you to follow them up, he said, and you come in Bottle Hall as well. He said, then I'll ride the rest of the way in the back of your van. He said, to Cartledingham Gates. I said, all right. So I left it till they'd gone and gradually made my way slowly round. And I could see them when I came up the top of the hill going by Bottle Hall. I could see John the parson a couple 100 yards behind him. When he got to the pub, he turned straight left and went up in the door. I pulled up outside and went in and had a couple of pints with him. I said, come on. Got him in the back of the van so he couldn't be seen. I overtook the walkers and I got a friend living in Dunry Street, called his bungalow. I said, come on, John. He got out the van quick and we went round the back door with my mates. He saw me first. I said, come on, I want a drop of whiskey quick. And I got the parson here, I got the rector here. He said, I got the parson. And the rector appeared. Oh, good morning, Vicar. He said, come and have a drop of whiskey. So we had a couple of whiskies there and we watched the walkers go by. And I said, right, oh, come on, John. I got him in the back of the van again. And I dropped him out of sight near Cartledingham Church. And he went walking along. I said, yeah, you soon got to hear. He said, I had a pickup on the way. I had a good friend give me a ride. Anyhow, Sainsbury wrote out a cheque for £500 that afternoon at dinner time for Friends of Essex Churches. So he was generous to the village. And when we were building the village hall every year, before he moved to Toppersfield, he used to give us a donation of £100. And Leslie Plummer, what lived up the Barrack Hall, he used to take my books, the village hall books, up to an accountant at London, and then they'd get the tax rebate off Sainsbury's £100. So instead of actually 100, we used to get about 170 something off it for this tax rebate. So the Sainsbury's, all right, they were strange in a way. I mean, she said to me one day, couldn't get his lordship 2 ounces of gold block tobacco, will you? So just before Christmas, she said he won't have enough tobacco over Christmas. So I was all right, my lady. So I got in my own car, my own petrol, went to Yeldon, got this 2 ounces tin of gold block, Will's gold block. in a presentation sleeve with little robin and holly on. And I said to the lady, how much is it? And she said, 186. I said, right, 186 on that sleeve. And I said, they won't believe me, I don't suppose. So I took it down and put it on the kitchen table. She said, that's not Will's gold block. I said, yes, it is, my lady. No, it's not, she said. I said, it is, my lady. That's in a presentation sleeve. And I poked the 2 out tin out. Oh, yes, so it is, she said. Oh, well, thank you. About a week after Christmas, she said, oh, Dick, did I ever pay you for that tobacco? I said, no, my lady, you didn't. How much was it, do you remember? I said, yes, 186. Was it so much? I said, yeah. So she got her purse out of a drawer, and she'd got pound notes in the purse, and she filled and buggered about. She finally come up with 181. She said, that's all the change I got. She said, I shall have to owe you 5 pence. And I thought, well, I never. I said, oh, I don't worry about that, Malone. I never did get the 5 pence, but I mean, that was one of those things, wasn't it? She kicked at a dock one afternoon. We came along over a little bridge, and I hadn't taken notice. This single dock was growing up. So she looked up with her foot. She said, what's that? Quick as a flash, I said, delphinium, my lady. Oh, that's all right, she said, I love delphiniums. And the next day they went back to London. I went along and pulled it out. She never did think more about that. Well, we had a burglar, we had a break-in. We had a break-in while I was there. And all we could find missing was a carriage clock. He had gone away and they'd put it up in his wardrobe. I didn't know where the hell it had gone. I knew that was on his dressing. I knew that was on a bureau and that had gone. But I didn't know it was in his wardrobe till the housekeeper told me. She said, that carriage clock was gone. So I said, well, I didn't know whether he took it back to London or what. He'd know. And she said, a pound out of the drawer, a pound note laid in the drawer. Well, I went through 2 or 3 weeks. The police come in the garden one day. They said, we've caught your burglar. I said, have you? He said, yeah. I said, how? I said, by his fingerprints. I said, he broke out of Parkhurst, is it, on the Isle of Wight prison. He'd pinched a rowing boat. He'd rowed from the Isle of Wight down to Solent to Southampton. He got to London. He went in one of the best hotels in London. He'd hire a taxi every morning, and he'd say to the taxi driver, he had the same one, we'll go down to Kent this morning. He would ride by places which he thought looked unoccupied. He'd go round the back door with a gallon can and knock the door. If anybody came, he'd say, my car seemed to run out with water. Can you give me a can of water, please? So if anybody came, he'd fill the water up. If nobody came, he'd go back to the taxi driver and say, there's nobody here. Come back in 10 minutes flat and I'll be ready for you. And this is what he'd done at Hosey. And he left his fingerprints at one place, and they tracked him down to this hotel. And he admitted that he'd been down to North Essex. They said, you broke into a house belonging to Lord Sainsbury. He didn't know. He said, well, there wasn't no money there, only a pound note in the drawer. So they said, you took his carriage clock and a camel dressing gown. With Lady Sainsbury insisted he'd pinched a camel dressing gown. So I said, I can't see a burglar coming away with a camel dressing gown. She said, who do you believe, the burglar or me? I said, well, I obviously believe you, my lady, you say it's gone. As the police come, they said, we've caught him by his fingerprints. They said, the carriage clock is in a tree. He saw some old boy coming down the lawn after dinner, that was me. And he made a hasty getaway, and rather than be caught with a carriage clock, he stuck it in a tree. I said, well, I did put my rake in the pond. I wonder if he'd flung it in the pond. We had it round the orchard. Sure enough, there was this carriage clock in the crotch of a tree. And the director had given it to the old man when he retired as chairman. So that was a very good one. That was in a leather case. And when we brought it in, they'd been out there in the wet, you see. The leather case all fell to pieces. It hadn't been glued together. It was full of bloody hairy wigs, but the clock was still going. the old man had got his clock back. And they was on about the dressing gown. So the policeman said he never had a dressing gown. He said the burglar said, what do you think I want with a bloody dressing gown for? So I said to the lady, he never had a dressing gown. She said he did. She looked at me, she said, who do you believe? The burglar or me? I said, well, obviously, I said, I believe you, but I said, I don't believe he would take a dressing gown. When they came the next weekend, she said, I've got apologies to make. She said the dressing gown was up London all the time. Old girl was only going to try and get one on insurance, I reckon. That was we had fun and games down there. Oh, Beryl Bryce, they went away for a few days, and when they came back, I used to go to Barbados or down to West Indies in January. That was another housekeeper. So they'd be down there for 6 weeks. And when they'd gone, she said, I'm going to have a tidy up in the pantry. Get everything out the pantry. She said, look at this old bit of cheese. It was an old bit of white cheese that was like a bar of soap. She said, that's been in that pantry, she said, bloody months. She said, chuck it out. So I said, all right. So I took it, and rather than throw it in the dustbin, I tied a bit of string round it and went and tied it in an apple tree up the orchard. I thought the little blue tits would love that. Anyhow, when they came back in February, I took a paper in on the Saturday morning. I said, are they all right? She said, yeah, they ain't too bad. She said, you know that bit of cheese I told you to chuck out? I said, yeah. She said, she hunted for that last night. I said, did she? She said, yeah. She said, where's that piece of cheese I left in there gone? She said, I made out I didn't know what she was talking about. She said, I've tidied the pantry up, lady, I never saw one. Well, there was a piece of cheese in there, she said, when we went. She said, well, if there was, she said, I never saw it when I tidied up and cleaned the pantry. Well, I don't know where the hell it's gone, she said. So I said, she can have it back. She said, why didn't you throw it away? I said, no. I said, I couldn't get it. Keep quiet. I went up the orchard, I cut it off the tree, and I took it in till I cut the string off, and the edges were just been nibbled a bit. She got her knife on the kitchen table and she trimmed it up so nice and square. She said, right, don't say nothing. I said, I shan't. And when the lady came down after breakfast, she said, you didn't look very well for that cheese in your pantry last night, my lady. She said, why? She said, that was there in full view. Look, here it is. Well, I'm but damn, she said, how did I miss that? She said, I don't know. She said, I thought, well, I'll have a look this morning. She said, first thing I saw her. Well, fancy that. She said, oh, well, put it on the cheese board at lunchtime. She said, she had one come, because I said there was 15, you see, different ones. She'd only been there a fortnight. She said, she's a charming lady, isn't she? I said, I don't know, my lady. I said, I haven't wintered and summered her yet. Oh, you bloody country people, she said, you're all the same, you're narrow-minded as hell, she said. I said, well, there's an old saying in the country, you got to winter and summer somebody before you know it. I said, and I haven't wintered or summered her yet. I said, I've only known her a fortnight, and I'm holding my decision about her. And when about a month, she said, she'd get on my bloody nerves. She said, no good, she'll have to go. I said, I thought she was a charming lady to start with. She had another one come who'd been housekeeper Selfridges, a very smart woman, and her husband had left her. And she'd got about a year to do for a pension at Selfridges. Selfridges or Harrods, a big store. And they happened to know that Lady Sainsbury was looking for a housekeeper with accommodation. And they got in touch with the lady and said, would you like to give Mrs. Burnham a job for a year? So she did. And this Mrs. Burnham came. She was dressed up to the nines, tall, slim woman, very nicely spoken. And I had orders, whenever they went out the gate, winter time, was to turn the central heating off. And I said, it's rather cold in the house, you know, my lord was. He said, if they get the polish out, he said, that'll keep them warm if they want to work. He said, the housekeeper will keep warm, he said, without the central heating on. So I used to turn it off. Regularly they went, I'd turn it off. I went in one Tuesday morning for coffee about 10, and there was Mrs. Burnham with a great big overcoat on, a scarf round her neck, gloves on her hands. I said, "Do you feel all right?" She said, "I'm perished." She said, "I'm frozen. This house," she said, "is like a morgue." I said, "Yes, I must admit it's very cold outside." She said, "I got all this central heating, heating and now am I in here in the cold." I said, "Look, dear, I feel so sorry. I'm going to put it on." She said, "Don't you get in a row." I said, "Don't you worry." I said, "That's no good work for a multi-millionaire." I said, "You working in here nearly froze stiff." I said, "Don't you dare say a word to them. I'm going to keep that heat on now." So I went and turned it on. She said, "I shan't say a word, Dick." So all the time, all winter when she was there, I never turned it off when they went out the gate, and he didn't know any different. The house, his secretary rang me up one day. She used to ring and she used to tell me things confidentially, you know, and so on, and I could tell artisan her name was. I said, "Lady Sainsbury told me to tell you, Dick, that the swimming pool wasn't hot enough the weekend." So I said, "Well, the weather wasn't very hot, Iris." So she said, "Well, I've told you." I said, "Why the hell couldn't she tell me herself?" I said, "Talking to her Monday morning when she went." She said, "Well, I've got to tell you that's not hot enough." I said, "Well, I think it's hot enough." I said, "I've just washed my feet in it anyhow." I said, "So that's hot enough for my feet." And then one Saturday, used to have to put it on a Thursday night, Thursday afternoon. I forgot all about it on this Thursday. I didn't think a word about it till I got up Friday morning. I thought, damn me, I never put the heat on the swimming pool. But they gave it up. It was nice weather, lovely sunny morning. So as soon as I got there, I turned the heat on, got the boiler going and so on. And I went and tested the temperature of the thermometer about a half hour before they got there, and that was about 76. And she always wanted at 78. They got out of the rolls, went in the kitchen for a few minutes, and she come striding across the lawn up to the swimming pool. He behind her, so I followed him. She immediately bent down and put her elbow in the pool, like ladies did when they were bathing a baby one. She got up, she went to the thermometer. She said, "The bloody pool is only 77. So I said, "Well, that's nearly 78. "That's not 78, she said, "it's only 77. Bloody good having a swimming pool down here," she said, "and you can't get in it when you want to," and smacked down the steps. And there his lordship stood with his mouth open. And I thought, Christ, I'm going to hear it now. So I said, "Well, my lord," I said, "I'll tell you the truth." I said, I didn't switch the heat on the pool till this morning. Because I said, I knew the weather was set fine. It was going to be hot, sunny day all day. I said, "I saved you 12 hours oil burning all night." I said, and I thought, well, that 12 hours oil burning, that will heat up with the sun during the day. And of course, that went through his mind. He'd saved 12 hours oil. "Don't worry about it," he said. "For the time she get her swimming costume on, it'll be 78, so I got away with that very well." Now, what else were we on? Oh, Ken Marksdale. When I was in Sainsbury, the burglar alarm went off. We don't know what made it go. Anyhow, I rang the people to come and reset it. So the bloke said, "I'll be down there about 7. So I said, "All right, I'm going to lock up and go home for me tea. I'll meet you down there about 7. His engineer come at 7 and he'd reset it. And I bet he hadn't got hardly down to Yeldham, and that went off again. So I thought, well, I'm a damn. And I didn't know whether somebody was watching points, waiting for me to go and then try to get in again. And I happened to meet Ken Marks up in the village. I said, "I'm having trouble with old Sainsbury's burglar alarm." I said, "I've engineers been and reset it. It's still gone off again." I said, They can't come till 2 in the morning. I said, they told me to go home and get to bed. I said, well, if anything happened, are you going to be responsible? And they said no. I said, so? I said, I'm going down about 9:30, I said, and I shall sit there till they come leaving ready 2 o'clock. So Ken said, well, look, I'm on duty till 11. He said, I'll come down and keep you company for an hour. I said, all right, Ken. So Ken came down. We both sat on the old man's settee in the sitting room, you see. Ken said, if you were working for Carlton Whitlock now, he said, you know what you'd be doing, don't you? So I said, yes, I do, Ken. I said, I should be pouring you out a drop of whiskey, shouldn't I? He said, yeah, that you would. He said, but means you work for Lord Sainsbury, a multi-millionaire, he said, with selling bottles and bottles of whiskey every day. He said, we can't have one. I said, yes, we can. I said, I got the key to his wine cupboard. So I got the key out of my pocket and I went to the cupboard under the stairs where all his drink was. There wasn't a bottle of whiskey starter, so I grabbed a bottle of Teachers and locked the door up and got a couple of tumblers, and me and Ken sat there to 2 or 3 whiskies each. And about 11, Ken said, well, I think we make back to Bumstead. So I said, all right, Ken. I said, I'll hang on. And he said, wait a minute, come a motor. And the engineer came. It was about 12:30. I said, oh, you're early, and you said. He said, yeah. He said, I know what the trouble is. And he fixed it in 5 minutes, and I put the whiskey back in the cupboard and locked the door. Came home. All right, never was no more trouble. Sainsbury come the next day, and that was our football club dinner. And he was president, you see, so him and the lady was coming to the dinner and was on the top table. I was chairman. So before we went and sat down, I said, I said to him when he got out the rolls, I said, I had problems with your burglar alarm last night. So he said, oh, did you? I said, yeah. I said, I was down there till nearly 12. I said, waiting for the engineer to come. And I said, but I daren't go home till he'd been and reset it. Oh, he said, thank you very much. I said, well, I didn't know whether anybody was watching points. I said, as a matter of fact, I said, I had the local policeman come and keep me company for an hour. I said, I took the law in my own hands, so I said, I gave him a drop of your whiskey. He looked over, he said, oh, you did you? I said, yes, sir. I said, I'm sure you wouldn't mind. He never made an answer. Do you know David Smith, what lived at Stoke, worked at Artisan Ellis? David was there representing the Health League. He said to David, what do you reckon Dick done last night? David said, no idea, sir. He said the burglar alarm went wrong. He'd got the local policeman, wherever he came from. He said, keep him company for an hour down there. He said the audacity to unlock my wine cupboard and to help himself and the local policeman to my whiskey. David said, well, I would think you'd be pretty pleased to think they were doing it. Well, yes, he said, but David said, well, they couldn't ask you, could they ever, could they? Well, no, I suppose not. I hadn't thought of it like that, he said. Told David. He used to love the football dinners, didn't he, Dolly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's all about Lord Sainsbury. He buried up here. They had the village hall for the wake afterwards. Yeah. He had 2 grandchildren came. His daughter had married a Scotsman. And he bought them a fairly big estate in Scotland somewhere. And they hadn't had the estate long, and they separated. He'd got 2 girls. He said his name was Anderson. He said he only married my daughter, he said, for what he could get an estate in Scotland. That's all he married her for. And these 2 little girls were 2 nice girls. They came there one summer holiday for a week, and one of them was to learn to play the violin. And Lord Sainsbury used to always have a rest after lunch, afternoons. He'd go up on an old studio couch he'd got in what he called his dressing room. He'd lay on there and doze off. and the little girls were banished to their bedroom to keep quiet. And I was working in the front garden, and one of them opened the window. And they used to say, "Hello, Dick." I said, "Hello, Kirsty." I said, "Have you got your violin up there with you?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Give me a tune out the window, will you?" "All right," she said. She went and got her fiddle, and she was scraping away at her violin out the window. And he gave an enormous shout from the bedroom next, "Shut that noise at once!" I had done it to stir him up. Poor little girl said, "Oh, Grandma, Grandpapa is very annoyed." So she said, "Dare and play them more." So I said, "I'll come about 4 just to help unpack one thing and another." She said, "All right." So when I went to Saturday morning, took a newspaper in the Saturday morning. So I said, "Everything all right?" She said, "Yeah." She said, "I'm just getting her breakfast ready now to take upstairs." The old man always used to get up for his breakfast. He'd always have bacon and egg and sausage and fried bread, and had proper cooked breakfast every morning he was down there. So when they went on the Monday, they used to go about 9:30, 9:45. I had a vantage spot that I could see if the rolls went by Ted Mortlock's farm. And I knew if it went by there, that if they wouldn't turn around if they forgot anything up there. So I made my way down to the kitchen, and Mrs. Bryce was upstairs. I could hear her upstairs, so I put the kettle on. I called up to her. "Mrs. Bryce," she said, "Yeah." I said, "Coffee time." So she said, "All right." So down she came, and I said, "Look, I hope you don't mind me coming in your kitchen, putting the kettle on." I said, "But I used to do it. As soon as they're gone," I said, "I'll give them a chance to get out of the way. We'll come in and we relax 10 minutes and have a cup of coffee." She said, "What a good idea." Took a fag out and lit it. So I said, "Well, how'd you get on the weekend with them?" She said, "What a charming old couple." She said, "Nothing's too much trouble." She said, "I've dropped into it right up here lovely." She said, "That's just right, because her husband wasn't working there. Her husband was, he wasn't going to do nothing. He was messing about." She said, "What a delightful old couple. I'm very pleased." I said, "Good." Well, the next weekend they never came because his brother's got a party on in London. So she had the weekend off. But the third week was getting near their holiday, you see. So I went in on the Monday. I saw them safely off. And I went in on the Monday. Beryl was already, we'd got Christian names then, already sitting at the kitchen table with the coffee poured out, fagging about. So I pulled my chair up and sat down. I said, "Well, how'd you get on this weekend?" She said, "What a bleeding old cow." Looked, I said, "Christ, you've changed your tune since a fortnight ago." She said, "She been an old bastard," she said. "What a bleeding old cow she is," she said. "Nothing bleeding right for her." She said, "I'm not bloody stopping here." I said, "Well, you..." She said, "I don't finish till 9 o'clock on a Saturday night and 9 o'clock on a Sunday night." I said, "No, I don't suppose you do by the time I've had their evening meal." I said, "And time you clear away and wash up, it must be 9 o'clock. She said, "I've got to walk home down that bleeding road." She said, "In the dark, no bloody street lights and nothing." She said, "I bloody near fell over once." I said, "Ain't bloody having none of this." She said, "But don't you tell my husband, don't you tell Ern." She said, "Don't you tell Ern." I said, "I shan't say a word, don't worry." She said, "I'll tell Ern they're ever so nice and ever so good to work for." She said, "He'd do his nut if she knew." The following weekend, they went off on the Monday again, and I went in. There she stood, and her hand was on the shape. I said, "You all right?" She said, "Yeah." "What do you reckon she said this morning?" I said, "I don't know." She said, when she went out the door, she said, she turned round and said, "You want to get your finger out," she said, "and do a little work. The bloody place is getting filthy." I said, "She never did, she?" She said, "Yes, she did." I can't believe it. She said, "Honestly, Dick," that was her very words, "pull your finger out," she said, "and get some work done. Bloody place is filthy." And a voice from the kitchen door said, "What did you say?" Upstairs, her husband stood in the door and listened to all this. "Oh, Aunt," she said, "I didn't know you was there." He said, "No, I didn't think you did," he said. He said, "What did you say to her?" She said, "I didn't say nothing." "You didn't say nothing to her?" He said, "No." He said, "You should have said, 'Here's the effing duster, you clean it yourself.'" I could have roared. He said, "We ain't bloody stopping here much bloody longer." Anyhow, on the following Saturday, Sainsbury's weren't coming. They weren't coming until the Sunday. Because his brother was 80 or something like that, his brother Robert. They were having a party at one of the big hotels, the Ritz or the Savoy or somewhere. So it was arranged at Sainsbury's, and Lord and Lady would come on a Sunday, have their lunch in Dunmow. They would ring Beryl when they left Dunmow, so she'd got time to go down to take the burglar alarm off and to welcome them in. So we were delivering papers in the village then. I was picking up at Spain's Hall that Saturday. I dropped Dolly down the road and went and done the last 3 or 4 houses for her. As I came out of the house of one, I could see a furniture van at their cottage. I always stood up on the hill looking down on this cottage. So curiosity got the better of me. I sat in the van and I thought, well, are they having furniture delivered or are they moving out? I sat there 5 minutes and watched, and I saw a settee come out the door and go in the furniture van, in an armchair. Look at that, moving. So I pulled up where I knew Dolly was in, having a cup of tea with her before she started on her papers. I said, "Here, Dolly," I said, "I reckon they're doing a moonlight flit." I said, "There's furniture coming out of the house." I said, "Well, if they are," I said, "she got to bring you the key back." Dolly said, "All right." And when I came home in the afternoon from Spain's Hall, Dolly said, "She's been with the key." So I said, "Have she?" She said, "Yes." She said, "We're off." She said to Dolly, told Dolly, she said, "We're stopping no longer. She's an evil woman." She said, "We're off." I said, "Where are they gone?" Dolly said, "I don't know. I didn't ask them." So about 7 o'clock at night, I said, "I reckon I ought to ring the Sainsbury's their flat." I said, "'Cause no good them ringing Beryl tomorrow, she won't be there." I said, "And no good them coming from Dunmow here and then locking the door and go in, the burglar alarm will be gone off." So I picked the phone up and I dialed their flat number and Lady Sainsbury answered. I said, "My Lady Dick here." She said, "Oh yeah." I said, "What time are you coming tomorrow?" "Oh, I don't know," she said. "Fancy ringing me," she said, "find out what time." "I don't know. What time we're coming?" She said, "Anyhow, it's nothing to do with you." She said, "I'm going to ring Beryl. I'm just getting ready to go out." She said, "Bloody phone come just as I'm getting ready." So I said, "Well, I've gone." So she said, "What on earth do you want to worry yourself for?" She said, "I was all arranged that I should ring Beryl." So I said, "Hang on a minute, my lady." I said, "They've gone." She said, "I don't know what his lordship will say when I'm not ready." So I said, "My lady, will you listen to me for a minute or two?" There was silence at the other end. I said, "I've told you twice already they've gone." She said, "What do you mean they've gone?" I said, "I'll put it in plain English. They've buggered off." I heard a holler. "Alan?" I could hear his voice. "Dick says they've buggered off." So he come to the phone and he said, "What on earth are you talking about? They've buggered off." He said, "What do you mean?" "Exactly what I say, sir." I said, "They've buggered off." "Who?" I said, "Mrs. and Mr. Bryars." He said, "Where to?" I said, "I don't know." "Why, aren't they coming back?" I said, "I shouldn't think so. They've moved out lock, stock and barrel." "Well, that's a bloody fine state of affairs," he said. I said, "So tomorrow when you leave Dunmow, you'll have to ring me, because there's no good ringing Mrs. Bryars, because they're gone." "Well, I'm bedamned," he said. "Oh, all right." Not a word of thank you, nothing like that. So the next Sunday afternoon, about 2, I'd had my lunch, and the phone went. That was saying, "We're just going to leave Dunmow." Is that right? So I went down and took the burglar alarm off and was messing about there when the rolls pulled in. And he said, did you know anything about this? I said, no, I didn't, sir. I ain't got a clue. I said, I went shooting over Spain's all Fincherveld, and when I came home at 4 o'clock, I said, Dolly said they'd handed the key, they'd moved, and she was off. I said, and they didn't tell Dolly where they'd gone, and she never asked. Well, I don't know what we're going to do. He said, we're down here for the next 3 weeks. So I said, well, we'll think it over in the morning. So I took a paper in the morning. Lady Sainsbury sat there. I said, what are you going to do, my lady? Well, I don't know. She said, well, I'm not going to do all this work myself. She said, we'll have to go back to London. I said, shall I go and see Mrs. Dimmock up the village? I said, she's got nothing to do. I said, she'd been here before. I said, well, I'll go and see Maureen and see if she'll come down. She said, yes, if you like. So I got my motor and I come up, little woman down the road here. She was a widow, her husband died with cancer. I said, Sainsbury didn't meddle, Maureen. I said, the housekeeper's buggered off a weekend and they ain't got nobody down. They're down here for the next 3 weeks. I said, can you go down and so they don't have to go back to London? She said, yeah, all right. She said, go back and tell them I'll be down about 11. So Maureen took over then and she kept there right up till the time he died. In fact, they thought of what his sons, you see, they never came down with, because they didn't like their stepmother. So his 3 sons never came near. All the 9 years or 8.5 years I was there. So the sons looked after Maureen well. They bought her a new car, they paid for it, driving lessons to keep the old man happy. And when she died, Lady Sainsbury died several years before he did. She'd got sugar diabetes bad. And she used to have comas. And she went into a coma one Sunday night and he didn't worry too much about it because he'd seen her before. And after 10 minutes she didn't seem to come round. He rang our district nurse and he said, Aunt Clark, can you come down? Mrs. Clark, he said, my wife is in a coma, he said, and he don't seem to come out of it. And Anne went in, Anne told me so I could see as soon as I got in the door that she was dead. So she said, look, my lord, I think I'd better ring the doctor. I think I ought to ring the undertaker as well. What do you mean the undertaker? She said, well, I'm afraid Lady Sainsbury's died. Well, I can't. She said, she's come out of him before. She said, not after this while. She said, I'm afraid he's gone. He said, well, there's no need to ring the undertaker till the morning, is there? She said, I'm afraid there is. She said, you can't sit there all night, lay there all night on that settee. So this was 9 o'clock at night then. And that's how they got her away. And the sons looked after Maureen. In fact, still do. The trustees pay for the old folks' dinner and Maureen had to supervise it all and that sort of thing. And Maureen jumped into a nice little job there, really. That was Barrel Bras, that was. Had another one come. She was a cordon bleu cook, she said. She and her husband argued up the garden about parsley. They came from Yorkshire, or Lancashire, I don't know, one or two. She said, that's parsley. He said, nay, that's buttercups. She said, that's parsley. He said, no, it's buttercups. I could have stood and laughed at them too. They didn't reign very long. When I left, you know, I've got a month to do at home or 5 weeks to do at home. I was taken on a part-time job at Barrack, up the big house up the road. Only sort of 20 hours a week, what they said they could afford to pay. So I thought, well, I can do 1 or 2 garden jobs in the village. I'd only got a year to go before I retired. And he said, well, are you going to sign on the dole? I said, I can't, because I left. I can't. You can't go and sign on the dole if you leave any employment. They said, you can try it. So I went and tried it at Havel, and they said, what did you get the sack for? I said, I didn't. I said, I left. Oh, well, I'm sorry, you can't draw unemployment. So I said, well, I left. I didn't think I could. So they took my name and address, and next day I had a letter from the head office. They wanted to know why I left. So I wrote a letter back, and they'd got on the bottom, P.S. Please be careful what you write, because we may have to show it to Lord Sainsbury. So I wrote back by return of post that I left because I couldn't stand the aggravation any longer with the housekeeper, that new housekeeper they'd got, who would get out of her car and straight away go in my greenhouse and pick the watering can up and water everything on a Friday afternoon before they came. So I told her to clear out the greenhouse times, and the old lady Sainsbury said, I can do what I like in here. I said that was why I left. I said my blood pressure was going up. It wasn't any good for me. So I said I decided to leave, and I put at the bottom, P.S. You can show this letter to Lord Sainsbury if you wish. I think it speaks for itself. When I said I was there 8.5 years, there was 15 different housekeepers came in the house in that 8.5 years, and I never heard a word till 3 days later. They said you can go and draw your unemployment money straight away.